My parents sold me into slavery. At 7, I came back as a bone-crushing monster. Imagine a 7-year-old girl, sold by her own father, only to become something far more terrifying than anyone could have predicted. This isn't just a tale of childhood betrayal, it's the shocking origin story of a living weapon, forged by desperation and transformed by a twisted love. Witness the chilling journey that proves some monsters aren't born. They're made and they always come home to collect. Stay until the explosive end to witness what happens when that monster finally returns home to settle accounts with the father who sold her soul for drinking money. My father sold me to strangers when I was 7, thinking he was sending me into sexual slavery, but the twisted family who bought me turned me into something far more terrifying. A weapon that can crush human bones with a single touch. This isn't just another story about childhood abuse. It's the origin tale of how poverty, desperation, and parental betrayal created a monster that would eventually return to settle accounts with the man who destroyed his daughter's innocence for drinking money. Our monthly trips to the mall were the only glimpse of normalcy in my otherwise hellish existence. While other families shopped for necessities or luxuries, my mother and I would wander the gleaming corridors like ghosts haunting a world we could never inhabit. She would drift dreamily past every storefront, her hollow eyes drinking in displays of toys, jewelry, and silk dresses that represented lives forever beyond our reach. These weren't shopping trips, they were exercises in torture, windows into the prosperity that would never touch people trapped in our social standing. My mother moved through the mall like a sleepwalker, navigating someone else's dream, her fingers occasionally brushing against shop windows as if she could absorb some fragment of the beauty beyond the glass. I understood years later that these ritual wanderings weren't for my benefit, but for her some monthly dose of fantasy to numb the pain of a reality where my father's fists and empty bottles defined our daily existence. The mall became her church, and window shopping her prayer to a God who had long since abandoned our family. The only thing we could afford during these pilgrimages was our ritualistic ice cream, a single sweet moment that had to sustain us through weeks of hunger and fear. As we sat sharing our monthly treat, savoring every spoonful like it might be our last, that's when he approached us with a smile that seemed too wide for his face and eyes that lingered too long on my unusual appearance. "Your daughter could be a model, you know?" His voice carried the practiced smoothness of someone who had delivered this line countless times before. My jet black hair, pale skin, and emerald eyes had always made me stand out, and I had indeed fantasized about joining the beautiful women in the mall advertisements, surrounded by perfume bottles and jewelry, living in a world made of dreams and possibility. "My husband, he." My mother began to stammer, her voice carrying the familiar tremor that appeared whenever she had to make decisions without my father's permission. The stranger cut her off with practiced efficiency, clearly familiar with this dynamic. "Why don't I give you my card and you call me after Dad allows it?" His smile stretched even wider as he spoke, revealing something underneath that my 7-year-old mind couldn't identify but instinctively feared. There was hunger in his expression, but not the kind that ice cream could satisfy. My mother accepted the business card with trembling fingers, and I watched her tuck it into her beaten-up purse like she was hiding evidence of a crime. The stranger's eyes never left my face as he walked away, and I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the mall's air conditioning. Something fundamental had just shifted in our lives, though I wouldn't understand the true cost of that business card until it was far too late to run. The night my parents decided to sell me, I discovered that the most terrifying monsters aren't fictional creatures, they're fathers who calculate the street value of their 7-year-old daughter's body while their wife begs them to reconsider. That innocent business card would trigger the most soul-crushing conversation I've ever witnessed, where I learned that some parents don't just fail to protect their children, they actively auction them off to the highest bidder. I pretended to sleep that night, my small body pressed against the thin wall that separated my bedroom from the kitchen, listening to a negotiation that would haunt me for the rest of my unnaturally long life. My father's voice cut through the darkness with its usual aggressive edge, demanding answers about the stranger's proposition with the entitlement of a man who believed he owned everything in his house, including the people. "How much did he offer you, Janet?" The question hit the air like a slap, immediately followed by my mother's stuttered denial that there had been any money discussed. Her voice carried that familiar tremor that always appeared in his presence, the sound of a woman who had learned that honesty could be just as dangerous as lies when dealing with a man whose default response to everything was violence. The slam of his massive hands against the kitchen counter made me flinch in my bed, the sound echoing through our thin walls like a gunshot. "You're lying. I know how those things work." His accusation dripped with the kind of knowledge that made my stomach twist, even though I didn't understand what those things meant at the time. My mother's desperate protests fell on ears that had already decided she was guilty of withholding his rightful profit. But it was his next words that revealed the true depths of his monstrosity, words that would echo in my mind years later when I finally understood their full meaning. "We can't afford it anymore," he snarled, his voice carrying the calculation of a man weighing financial options. "I'm not even sure the damn kid is mine. You used to be quite the whore." The casual cruelty of questioning my parentage while looking at a face that was clearly his own showed a level of psychological abuse that went beyond mere physical violence. My mother's tearful response about having only one boyfriend before him was met with the kind of silence that felt more dangerous than screaming. I could hear him drinking, the familiar sound of alcohol being consumed as fuel for whatever decision was forming in his twisted mind. When she finally dared to speak again, her question revealed that she understood exactly what kind of transaction they were discussing. "So you want to give her away?" The hope in her voice that maybe, somehow, this could be about finding me a better life was immediately crushed by another violent slam in his response that would define the rest of my existence. "Don't be dumb. Who's talking about giving? We're selling it." The word "it" hit me like a physical blow. I wasn't even human to him anymore, just merchandise to be liquidated. When my mother tried to voice her concerns about what would happen to me, his final response revealed the complete absence of any paternal instinct. "That's none of my fucking business, Janet." In that moment, listening to my father negotiate the sale of his 7-year-old daughter to a stranger he believed was a predator, I learned that some betrayals are so complete they reshape your understanding of reality itself. The man who was supposed to protect me was actively planning my destruction, and he was perfectly comfortable with it as long as he got paid. But the tragedy was about to take an even more twisted turn. The couple who bought me weren't child traffickers as my father assumed, but something far more disturbing. Grieving parents who wanted to play house with a living doll replacement for their dead daughter. What I thought would be my descent into hell turned out to be my entrance into a different kind of prison, one decorated with love and luxury but built on the foundation of erasing everything that made me human. The morning after that horrific kitchen conversation, my mother's trembling hands helped me pack my few decent clothes while my father impatiently waited to escort us to the transaction. The bus ride felt like a funeral procession, with my mother's silent tears and my father's barely contained excitement, creating an atmosphere of dread and anticipation that made my stomach churn with every mile. Mr. Carson's handshake was firm and businesslike, the kind of transaction he had clearly conducted multiple times before. He handed me a lollipop with a smile that seemed genuinely warm, took a few pictures with professional efficiency, and then produced an envelope of cash that made my father's yellowed teeth flash in the first genuine smile I had seen from him in years. "Damn, if that's the price, we should make a new one," he exclaimed, the words hitting my mother like physical blows as she buried her face in her beaten pinkish parka. The car ride with Mr. Carson, who insisted I call him Ted, was a revelation in normalcy that felt more alien than comforting. He let me choose the music, spoke to me with kindness instead of aggression, and drove without the constant stream of profanity and road rage that had defined every journey with my father. The suburban house with its white picket fence looked like something from a magazine, the kind of home I had only seen in television commercials for products we could never afford. "I left a videotape in your room's television," Ted explained, leading me to a bedroom that was bigger and more beautiful than our entire apartment. "Please watch it and, during lunch, act like the girl you'll see. Got it?" The request seemed simple enough, and I was too overwhelmed by having my own television to question the strangeness of the instruction. The tape showed a girl who looked remarkably similar to me, laughing and playing in this very house with the same two adults who now claimed to be my new family. I studied her mannerisms, her speech patterns, and her interactions with Ted and Laura with the dedication of a method actor preparing for the role of her life. When Ted called me down for lunch, I performed my first audition as their replacement daughter. "You've done well. Delilah. This is your name now? Got it?" The casual erasure of my birth identity should have terrified me, but I was too busy marveling at the sandwich and soda more food than I usually saw in a day to process the full implications of what was happening. Over dinner that evening, Ted and Laura revealed the truth that would define the next 5 years of my existence. Their original daughter Delilah had drowned at 15 during a pool party, a tragedy so devastating that they refused to accept the finality of death. Instead of grieving and healing, they had decided to find a replacement, someone who could bring their perfect daughter back to life through careful training and unconditional love. The irony was intoxicating. I had escaped a father who saw me as worthless merchandise only to become a cherished possession for parents who loved me too much to let me be myself. For 5 years, I lived as their princess, attending great schools, taking amazing family trips, and wearing the best clothes money could buy. All I had to do was surrender my identity and become their dead daughter's ghost made flesh. No one expected that my 12th birthday would mark the end of my fairy tale existence and the beginning of a nightmare that would transform me into something no longer entirely human. When Ted and Laura sat me down for what I thought would be another family discussion, their words revealed a level of obsession so twisted that it made my biological father's cruelty seem almost simple by comparison. You know, Delilah. Our other Delilah was perfect, but she had a serious problem. Laura began, her voice carrying the kind of maternal concern that had always made me feel safe and loved. But there was something different in her eyes now, a desperate intensity that made my skin crawl despite the warm words. She grew up. She grew apart from us. If she never insisted on making her own decisions, on going to that damn party, she would still be here with us. Ted's teeth were grinding audibly as he spoke, his scientist's mind already calculating solutions to what he saw as a preventable tragedy. We can't let that happen to you. We won't lose another daughter to the curse of growing up and thinking she knows better than her parents. The way he said curse made it clear that he viewed normal human development as a disease that needed to be cured rather than a natural process to be celebrated. The basement laboratory had always been Ted's private domain, a space I was forbidden to enter during my 5 years as their pampered replacement daughter. Now, as they led me down the stairs into a room filled with machines that looked more like torture devices than scientific equipment, I began to understand that Ted's work was far more sinister than I had ever imagined. Your father is a very good scientist. He can fix you, Laura explained, her voice carrying the kind of blind faith that had allowed her to rationalize purchasing a child as a replacement for her dead daughter. The word fix hung in the air like a threat, implying that my natural growth and development were flaws that needed correction rather than milestones to be celebrated. I consented to the procedure because I wanted to stay with them, because I craved their love and approval more than I feared the unknown consequences of Ted's scientific intervention. After years of being cherished and spoiled, the thought of losing their affection was more terrifying than any physical pain they might inflict. I had no frame of reference for understanding what staying young forever actually meant in practical terms. As Ted began connecting wires and electrodes to my small body, Laura's nervous comment revealed a truth that should have sent me running. Let's hope it works this time. The casual mention of previous attempts implied that I wasn't the first replacement Delilah to undergo this procedure, and the others had apparently not survived the process or had been discarded when the results proved unsatisfactory. The machines hummed to life around me, and Ted's eyes gleamed with the kind of scientific fervor that had probably driven him to develop this technology in the first place. You'll be young forever, my Delilah, he promised, his voice mixing paternal love with the cold calculation of a researcher about to test his latest hypothesis on a living subject. The last coherent thought I had before the procedure began was the horrifying realization that I had escaped one form of child abuse only to become the victim of another. My biological father had seen me as merchandise to be sold, but Ted and Laura saw me as a science experiment to be perfected. Both perspectives denied my humanity, but only one came wrapped in the language of love and family devotion. The pain that followed would redefine my understanding of what the human body could endure while still maintaining consciousness. Right at that moment, as Ted's machines surged to life, I discovered that the human capacity for pain has no ceiling and that the real horror wasn't the agony itself, but waking up to discover I was no longer entirely human. The procedure that was supposed to preserve my innocence forever instead created something far more dangerous. A weapon disguised as a child who could turn living bone into powder with nothing more than an angry thought. The pain defied every description I had ever heard for physical suffering. It felt like every bone in my body was being systematically shattered into millions of fragments, then reassembled incorrectly, only to be broken again in an endless cycle of destruction and reconstruction. My limbs didn't feel attached to my body, they floated in a sea of metallic despair that I later realized was my own blood mixing with Ted's laboratory fluids. For days, I existed as nothing more than a pile of organic matter, conscious but unable to move or speak, aware of every sensation as my body was torn apart and rebuilt according to Ted's twisted specifications. I was simultaneously his beloved daughter and his most prized laboratory specimen, floating in chemical solutions that kept me alive while my biology was fundamentally altered in ways that should have been impossible. When I finally woke up in my bedroom, Ted and Laura hovering over me with expressions of desperate hope and barely concealed terror, I felt strangely normal despite the sharp pain at the base of my neck. They kissed my hair, begged for forgiveness, and asked repeatedly how I was feeling, their relief palpable when I assured them I was fine. The hours of infinite agony felt like they had happened to someone else, a distant nightmare that belonged to the girl I used to be. Running my fingers along my neck, I discovered the source of the lingering pain, a small, thorn-like protrusion that pricked my finger when I touched it. Ted's gasp when he examined it revealed that even he hadn't known exactly what his procedure would create. "It's a new bone," he whispered with the awe of a scientist witnessing an impossible breakthrough. For 2 years, life returned to an approximation of normalcy. While my classmates shot up in height, developed acne, and navigated the awkward transition to adolescence, I remained frozen in the body and mindset of a 12-year-old. Ted and Laura were ecstatic with the results. Their perfect daughter would never grow up, never rebel, never make the independent choices that had killed their original Delilah. The first sign that something more significant had changed came during a confrontation with Sandy, the tallest girl in my class who had made me her favorite target for bullying. "Why the hell don't your looks change? Are you a fucking witch?" she demanded, grabbing my wrist with the kind of aggressive force that had always made me cower in submission. I didn't mean to hurt her, I swear. I was only trying to pull my arm free from her grip. But the moment my fingers tightened around her wrist, I felt everything inside collapse like a house of cards. The sensation was instantaneous and nauseating. Sandy's ulna and radius crumbling into fragments while her arm swelled like rubber, blood erupting through her skin as bone shards tore through muscle and tissue. Sandy's desperate screams filled the hallway as she stared at what remained of her arm, now nothing more than a grotesque mass of blood and pulverized bone. The school nurse called it an impossible accident, unable to comprehend how such a small girl could cause that level of devastating injury to a much larger, stronger opponent. That night, the thorn-like structure in my neck burned like fire, and Ted's subsequent tests revealed the terrifying truth. Negative emotions triggered superhuman strength that could turn human bones to dust. The procedure designed to preserve my childhood innocence had instead created a monster who became exponentially more dangerous whenever I felt angry, scared, or threatened. But the tragedy was about to come full circle in the most terrifying way possible because the moment I finally understood what my biological father had truly intended when he sold me, the rage that consumed me activated abilities that would turn me into his worst nightmare made flesh. The realization that he had knowingly delivered his 7-year-old daughter to what he believed was sexual slavery ignited something inside me that made the thorn in my neck burn like molten metal, and I knew it was time for him to meet the weapon his greed had helped create. For weeks, after discovering my bone-crushing abilities, I had been processing fragments of conversations and memories, slowly piecing together the full scope of my father's betrayal. The casual way he had negotiated my sale, his complete indifference to what he assumed would happen to me, and his excitement about the money he would receive, all of it crystallized into a understanding so devastating that it physically hurt to acknowledge. My father hadn't just abandoned me or failed to protect me from a predator. He had actively orchestrated what he believed would be my sexual enslavement, calculated the profit margin of my suffering, and celebrated the transaction like he was selling livestock at market. The man who was supposed to be my first line of defense against the monsters of the world had personally delivered me to one, and his only concern was making sure he got paid for the service. The fury that built inside me as I processed this reality was unlike anything I had experienced during my years of abuse or even during Ted's horrific procedure. This was the rage of a child who had finally understood the full depth of a parent's betrayal, amplified by superhuman abilities that responded to emotional intensity like gasoline responds to flame. The thorn-like structure in my neck throbbed with increasing intensity as my anger reached levels that should have been impossible for any human to sustain. I could feel my enhanced strength building with each passing moment, my body becoming a weapon system that fed on negative emotions and converted them into devastating physical power. My fingertips tingled with the same sensation I had felt when Sandy's bones crumbled in my grasp, but magnified 100-fold by the intensity of my hatred for the man who had sold me into what he believed was a life of sexual torture. The bus ride to my old neighborhood felt like a pilgrimage of vengeance. Each familiar landmark, serving as a reminder of the poverty and abuse that had shaped my early years. But I wasn't the same helpless child who had left this place years ago. I was something Ted's science had created, something that existed in the space between human and monster, powered by justified rage and equipped with abilities that defied natural law. Standing on the cracked sidewalk outside the house where my nightmare began, I could see him through the window, still drinking himself into oblivion while my mother cowered nearby, probably counting the days until his alcohol-soaked liver finally gave out. He had no idea that the daughter he had sold was about to ring his doorbell, no concept that his casual cruelty had set in motion a chain of events that would bring something inhuman to his front door. As I reached toward the doorbell, the thorn in my neck burned with anticipation, and my enhanced abilities hummed with barely contained potential. The question that would define the next few minutes wasn't whether I would use my power, it was whether there would be anything left of him to identify when I was finished. After all, who would believe that a teenager too small for her age could turn a grown man's limbs to dust? He was about to become the first person to discover the answer to that question, and the last person who would ever have the chance to share what he learned. Sometimes the most broken children become the most dangerous adults. I learned that abuse doesn't just create victims, it can forge weapons that eventually turn on their creators. When parents treat their children as disposable commodities, they never consider that monsters have long memories and enhanced abilities. The greatest tragedy isn't what was done to mates, realizing that some people create their own destruction by underestimating the children they've betrayed. If this story resonated with you, hit that like button to help others find it. Leave a comment sharing your thoughts or experiences. Your words might be exactly what someone else needs to hear right now. And subscribe to join our community of resilient souls who've learned that sometimes being underestimated is your greatest superpower. Together, we're writing new endings to old stories, and I can't wait to share the next chapter with you.